Welcome to tonight's live stream. I'm going to get started in a minute. I just need to get some stuff taken care of. What's going on, Steve Owalamak? What's going on, Don? What's going on, Entrepreneur King? Glad to see you all here. I'm going to get ready to go and promote the stream, and so everybody knows the stream is on. And tonight's live stream, before I go into tonight's stream, I'm going to get into the perfunctory. And the perfunctory is I'm asking everybody to head over to Amazon.com to pick up the 2021 books of the SJS Direct Imprint, John ISIS, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess, and Taking Care of Business. Both of these books are available on Amazon right now. And I'm asking everybody to pick up these books because they're great positive Black fiction. And I'm trying to get the sales up to the milestone level we achieved last month. Now, last month we got over 120 sales, and I want to try to get those sales up to that level again. Now, these are the books of the 2021 catalog, and I also have the books of the 2020 catalog in front of me. For John Haynes, The Man with Nothing to Lose, ISIS, The Main Event, Eastern Blast from the Past, Eternal Night. All of these books are available on Amazon in paperback, and they all feature a lot of action-packed African-American fantasy I believe you'll enjoy. So I'm going to leave a link to all of my books on Amazon I just mentioned, and you guys can head over to Amazon and pick those books up. Yeah, Don, I come out with 4 to 5 books a year, and I try to make a lot of positive Black fiction because there's not a lot in the marketplace. So I always come out with 4 or 5 titles every year, and I'm getting ready to put in that work on that fall catalog and the 2022 catalog as well. So glad to see you here, Computer Robots. I'm going to get ready to get started in a minute. And I've been working on books like The Woman Crisis and the last book of the 2022 catalog, The Easting Story. That's what I've been working on. Now, Don, I've considered working on cartoons. I can write screenplays. I can write comic books. But the whole thing is getting things financed, like the upcoming John Haynes at Death's Door comic. I mean, the thing that really impedes me from pursuing other ventures is trying to get the money together to put those projects together. So one of the things I'm working on is a John Haynes at Death's Door comic. And that was all done, thankfully, due to many of my viewers donating to the Cash App by clicking the link in these live streams or donating through PayPal through to the live streams. That money, along with the Patreon and the PayPal donations, has helped me to raise some of the funds to start working on that comic. And I'm hoping to get started as related to the John Haynes at Death's Door comic in August. Hopefully that's when the artist says he will be available. If not, I'll start looking for somebody else. So I haven't really started the show Far Side, and I'm gonna get into tonight's topic, which is called America Quits. And it's about how all of these Americans are walking away from their jobs. Now, as this pandemic has started to ease, there has been a major surprise for most of America's employers. And most of America's employers thought they would be able to get America's workers to just go back to work and get back to business as usual. But most of America's workers are looking like they have had enough of the modern workplace. Now, America's workplace has really been changed ever since 9/11. And during 9/11, that's when the job market changed from being one that benefited employees with the dot-com boom to one that benefited employers because there was a major recession where they got the leverage. And after the 2001 recession, many employers got the leverage and they used that to take advantage of workers. And as the housing and subprime mortgage boom went bust, these employers gained even more leverage during the Great Recession of 2008. And it was during the Great Recession of 2008 that we started to see many of these employers starting to get very smug, starting to get very cocky, and starting to get very picky and very selective as related to the workers that they hired. And in some of these interviews that people would go to, I remember going in 2009 to many CUNY office assistant hiring pools and having to deal with employers who were just so arrogant and so nasty that they would go out of their way to actually condescend to me, talk down to me, and make no efforts in some cases to even interview me because these people thought, oh, there are more workers out here, and because there are more workers out here, I can just treat people like garbage. And I remember going on one interview after I got my A+ certification in 2010, where one employer was so smug as related to this IT job that he decided to change the job description right in the middle of the interview. And that was one of the most unethical things I had ever seen. But these are the type of tactics that many of these employers had been doing ever since the Great Recession. And they have been on a tear, just emotionally abusing people, verbally abusing people, and disrespecting people for over a decade. And this is even during the time of the Trump economic boom. Many of these employers have just been mistreating and abusing people. And many Americans have, as I see it, are looking like they are saying enough is enough. And the reason why I believe many people out here are saying enough is because as many Americans have been sitting at home, many Americans have been really thinking and reflecting on their life because the COVID-19 pandemic was an incredible trauma for most of America's workers. And it was an incredible trauma because, one, you had these politicians telling people they had to shelter in place. And two, you had many Americans had to deal with the trauma of losing a job. And as somebody who has lost jobs in the past, I can tell you that that's a very devastating emotional trauma to go through. As somebody who lost a job in 2001 and 2002 back to back, I can tell you that you go through incredible amounts of anxiety. You go through incredible amounts of fear because your whole life has been completely destabilized. You don't know how you're going to be able to pay your bills. You don't know how you're going to try to get through a day. And your whole mind goes into survival mode. So your whole frame of thinking becomes completely different. And a lot of people don't understand the fear people go through as related to losing a job. I mean, losing a job is basically like a death in the family. And it's an incredible trauma to go through. And it's an incredible trauma that it just, once you experience it, you're never the same after that, because it's not just the rejection, it's the worrying about how you're going to be able to take care of yourself, how you're going to be able to feed yourself. And what makes it even worse is you start going from making long-term plans into a day-to-day survival mode. And it's that day-to-day survival mode that can just completely transform your mind. And that's something many of these politicians and business people, especially a lot of these executives, are not really thinking too critically about. Many of these people, they are just so caught up in their feelings about trying to get people to come back to work and go back to business as usual, that they're not really understanding what's going on as related to this whole issue of people going back, pushing back as related to going back to work. So they're sitting there in their vacuum thinking that, oh, people, they are going back to, they're pushing back on going back to work, but they're pushing back on going back to work for a reason. And part of that reason is processing all of that emotional trauma of losing a job and having to, again, think about how their life has become completely destabilized. And that's something your Dr. Fauci's and your politicians on the left haven't never really thought about, how you just destabilize somebody's life. It doesn't matter whether you gave them a $300 bonus as related to unemployment. You've practically taken people out of a routine, and you've taken them out of what they knew and put them in an extremely unstable place. Thank you for the Cash App. I really appreciate it. And this is what puts people on edge and has them tense. So you've already destabilized people with them losing their jobs, and half the country was out of work. That was already one trauma you hit on people. And then they had to deal with the trauma of the whole pandemic, which was another blow to them. And that trauma that people had to deal with that pandemic, getting ill from COVID-19, and then some people watched their relatives pass away. That's a very devastating trauma that a lot of people had to deal with, and they've been through practically, like as Mr. Superboy has said, a lot of people have been through a war, and then you wanted people to go back to business as usual. And I'm sorry, this is what many of these clueless employers, especially many of these executives, don't understand. There is no going back to business as usual once somebody has gone through an incredible trauma like this. And I can tell you from personal experience, from losing 2 jobs back to back and then losing a job in 2008, you don't go back to being the same person you were once you have lost a job. I was a happy-go-lucky, fun person back in the 90s and the early 2000s when I thought I had hope. But these days, I'm a very grim and somber person, because after losing 2 jobs and then going through long-term periods of unemployment, I can tell you that you're not the same person you were before. You can't sit there and be Mr. Smiley Face after you've lost a job. You can't deal with all of that, again, being rejected from job to job to job to application to application to application. This is going to change who you are. And this is compounded with a pandemic where people lost friends, lost family members, and many of these people were isolated for extremely long periods of time. And as those people were isolated, they were dealing with a lot of pain, because I can tell you from being long-term unemployed, you have family members who get frustrated, family members who get angry, and they're looking for you to get back on your feet real fast, but they don't understand that a lot of times you can go to these interviews to the best of your ability and make the eye contact, put on the smile, and this same person won't even think about interviewing you. They're not even going to try to interview you. And that's one of the frustrating things. And then sometimes you go to these interviews and these people blow you off. And then, like I said before, in one interview, the person practically changes the job description in the middle. So a lot of people, they're dealing with a lot of issues as related to their own mental health, like D Wood at 78 has pointed out. And this is what led to a lot of homes breaking up during the pandemic. I mean, a lot of people, in addition to dealing with losing a job, they dealt with losing a spouse because the spouse divorced them or filed for divorce. And we saw domestic violence go through the roof. We saw families break up, but we have employers sitting there. Thank you, Rodney, for the Cash App. I really appreciate it. We have employers expecting people to just pick up and get back up like nothing happened. I mean, over the course of this year, people have gone through incredible trauma, and your people in government and business want to sit there and think, oh, well, people are just going to pick up and get back up and get back to business as usual pre-pandemic. But I'm sorry, people have changed. People have gone through great pain. I mean, half this country has been out of a job. Half this country is still suffering. Half of this country is still dealing with emotional and mental health issues. And that's what has this country on edge. And that's why so many people are are getting out here and quitting their jobs, because they have just reached the boiling point and they've just reached the breaking point. And that's something that flies over many of your leftist politicians. That's what flies over many of your executives. Many of these people in America, they were already at the breaking point before, because 50% of the country was working at low-wage jobs. And that was already before your Donald Trump was even elected. And now those people, they were dealing with unemployment. They're dealing with the loss of family members. They're dealing with the frustrations that they're dealing with their families falling apart. And some people were dealing with the possibility of losing their homes. But you have these employers sitting there in delusion land, disconnected from the people, just expecting people to just pick up and leave where they left off a year later. And that really, again, shows how out of touch your politicians are, how out of touch your business people are, and how out of touch many of your wealthy elite, I believe, are. They just expect a person who has been on the brink for years to just come back and be who they were before. And this is a issue I've dealt with even in my own family for years. People expect me to go back to being what I was. But once you've gone through great trauma, you're not going to go back through to being who you were, and you're not going to be on the same plane that you were before. And this is what many employers don't understand. They're sitting there thinking, oh, we need to fill these jobs. No, you need to really listen to your workers, because your workers have been through a great trauma. And many of your workers, even if they were unemployed, were dealing with trauma. And many of your essential workers, they have been through hell at these jobs, having to deal with that tension, having to deal with that fear. And I know about many of the retail and customer service jobs having to deal with that anger and that rage. And going to work like that, I know how that feels, because it's like you're going into a work environment on pins and needles. You're going into a work environment filled with anxiety. You're going into a work environment filled with tension. And the whole thing is you're walking on eggshells, because you don't know what the next day is going to bring. You don't know if this is the day you're going to get COVID. You don't know if it's the day that you're going to possibly wind up sick. And many of these employers, they're sitting there, oh, I don't really care about these people. And it's like, that's the way people are feeling. They feel like these employers just don't care about them. And that's why so many people, they just got fed up and decided to quit a paying job during a recession. Some people are saying, oh, a lot of these people are quitting because they're looking for better jobs. And yes, there are some that are doing that, but a lot more are deeply frustrated about the whole economy, and they're also frustrated about the way they have been treated at these jobs for over a decade. And over a decade here in this country, employers have been abusing people. I mean, I look at the way that we do business in this country, and it's just incredibly cruel. I mean, many of these employers do everything in their power to make it where the work environment is actually unbearable. They go out here and they schedule crazy hours for people. They create erratic schedules, and people are just frustrated about all of these work conditions because there's no real stability in their life. I mean, when you go to these jobs these days, one day you can be scheduled for 6 in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the next day you're scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning to 7 in the evening. And that really is frustrating for a lot of people, those erratic hours. And if you have to work those erratic hours, they do something to your mental health. I mean, if you've had to work a job where one day your hours are one set of hours, and then the next day it's another set of hours, that messes with people's sleep cycles. And when you mess with people's sleep cycles, this makes it where they become mentally unstable. And this is what many of these disconnected executives don't really understand, because some of these guys are meth heads anyway, and they just take crystal meth and they work all sorts of 18, 20-hour days because they are just out of touch with people. But the average everyday American needs their rest, and they need a stable schedule. And this is one of the things that frustrates a lot of people. And this is one of the things that leads to a lot of people just walking away. Now, another thing that leads to people walking away from the workplace, in addition to the erratic hours, is the way many of these managers talk to people. A lot of these managers, yes, they have MBAs. Yes, these people have PhDs. Yes, they are very well educated, but they have the people skills of a turnip. And because they don't know how to be tactful, they don't know how to be tasteful, and they just go out here and attack people, they wind up making a work environment that could be an easy work environment into a very difficult one. And when you have people coming out of a pandemic, the last thing that people who have been traumatized by a pandemic want to deal with is an abrasive, caustic boss who goes out here verbally abusing people, has no people skills, has no interpersonal skills. And yes, they know how to manage on paper, but they don't really understand people. They don't understand that sometimes, like the Bible says, a soft answer turns away wrath. And just because you're the boss with leverage doesn't mean you have to go out here and verbally abuse people. And you have to watch things like your tone. You have to watch things like the way your facial expressions are. And you have to watch your energy, because these things can lead to you not being able to connect with people. And a lot of these bosses, especially some of these female bosses, they don't know how to connect with people. Everything is about their feelings, but they don't understand that you're not really resonating with people because you think being loud is assertive, but being loud is something that turns people off. And going out here and making threats towards people, this is escalating the tension where you don't need to escalate tension. So a lot of managers out here over the last decade and a half or so, they don't really understand the whole approach to business. They don't understand that you need to be diplomatic. You need to go out here and really understand that you're supposed to be there for the people. You're not really listening to your workers. Everything is about you and what you want to do. Thank you, South Memphis, for the super chat. It is not about what the people need. And that's one of the things I learned when I took my course back in Monroe College for business administration. It's not about you, it's about the people. Because the class I took, organizational behavior, taught me all about how an organization is supposed to work. And you have to be able to work with your people. You have to be able to treat your people right. And a lot of employers, they're not really seeing their people as valuable people. They're just going out here treating people like fodder. And then when they go out here and treat people like fodder, they're expecting, oh, why is it that these people aren't productive? Well, you're treating people like garbage. And then when you have this pandemic going on, people have gone over and dealt with all of this trauma at home. They're dealing with a wife who is angry at them, kids who are at home all day and are pent up with a lot of frustration and anxiety. And then you have the women out here, they're really stressed out. And again, this was before your COVID was going on. You already had these tensions going on. And now it's got worse because many of these employers, again, they want to go back to those days of big productivity, but they don't understand that if your employers are not in a good place mentally, you're not going to get any sort of productivity at all. And if you're going out here thinking that you're going to get back to what you were, you're fooling yourself, because people cannot just put an entire country through a whole host of psychological trauma and then expect them to just come back and bounce back. And then what they're thinking is, oh, they're just going to just take my job because they can't get anything else, because they think that's the leverage they have. And many of these politicians and business owners are sitting there thinking, oh, he's sitting out because of the unemployment. No, a lot of people are just sitting out because they don't want to go back to that toxic work environment. They don't want to have to deal with any more stress. And many of these work environments, they are just so much stress that it's just unbearable. And you don't know what type of tension that is to go from a toxic work environment to a toxic home. And that's the thing that makes people snap. And this is something many of your politicians and business people don't understand. When you have to go from a toxic home to a toxic job, this is what puts people on super edge, and it makes you to the point where you're so anxious and so tense that it's like you're on a tightrope. And this is why so many Americans would say, look, I would rather walk away from this job because I just don't want to deal with this insanity from this boss who's sitting here making these ridiculous and unrealistic expectations. That's right, theory of everything, yeah, or a toxic train ride. A lot of people just, they've had enough. And many of these employers, they're sitting there thinking, like, oh, we're just going to go back to the, it's never going to go back to the way it was. And you're not understanding where these people's heads are at. And that's the big problem with America these days. We're not really listening to people and seeing where the American worker's head is at. The American worker's head is not in a place where they want to go out here and deal with a lot of stress. And they don't want to go to a workplace where they have to deal with these toxic bosses, these toxic co-workers, and have to deal with these crazy and ridiculous rules. Yes, there's a place for rules and structure and standards, but the way some of these bosses go out here and enforce their policies is basically psychotic and sociopathic. And many of these people, they go out here, especially I've seen with some of these women, they will bully people, harass people, threaten people, and just to get them to do basic things. And they escalate and make tensions where they don't need to be tensions, because these people, yes, they've got degrees, but they've got poor communication skills and even poorer organizational skills and poor leadership skills. So these people really don't know how to bring people together. And that's what people want. Yes, this is live, Gia Girl. It is a live stream. And I'm going hard because I see where a lot of America's workers are suffering. I know where they've gone through because I've gone through it myself. And I know why people are quitting in record numbers, because 4 million people walked away from their jobs, and they walked away because they are just so tired of all of the bullshit as I see it. And they're tired because these bosses, again, they don't live in reality. They just keep going out here, like I said, like the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They just keep going out here, piling on more and more, and they keep pushing and pushing not understanding these people are on a tightrope out here. A lot of these people have been through a lot of pain through the last year, and then you want to go back to pushing once again. No, you can't push like that because people have been through a ringer, and when you've had people go through a ringer, you don't know the powder keg that they are. I mean, these people are powder kegs. They are simmering and boiling in anger. They are deeply frustrated. And it's just not a matter of if somebody goes off out here. Thank you, Traveling Man, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. If you guys want to donate to the super chat, you may do so as well. And if you want to donate to the Cash App, like the brother did earlier, you can donate to the Cash App as well. And a lot of these people, like I talk about in the Man Crisis, are simmering and boiling in anger. They're deeply frustrated. And when these people come back into a toxic work environment, after coming into a toxic home, they're dealing with all of these bills that have piled up. And this is going to lead to, as I said it to myself, an explosion of rage. And a lot of people, they don't really understand what they're doing with a lot of their attempts to try to bully people as related to their policies, as related to that jab. They don't understand this is a stick of dynamite. And the whole thing is, when you F with somebody's money, they're going to F you up. And that's the scary part that people don't understand. You've messed with people's money for over a year, and people, they're hot, they're angry, and you don't know where you're going when you mess with people's minds. And again, you've messed with people's minds for over a year, you've messed with their money, and then you want to go back to business. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. I mean, only a psychopath would think I can go back to the way the world was when the world has changed. And a lot of these people, they're sitting there wondering, well, why can't I find workers? That's the same type of insanity I see all with black women who say, I can't find a good man, but you raised all these boys in a single mother household, and you're looking for this good man, but you raised a beta male who doesn't understand anything about being a man. So you're sitting there looking for this whole employee to be this good worker, but this worker doesn't see anything in it for him after going through all of this trauma. And you want to go back to the way things were, expecting people to just sit there and accept it. But people are just saying enough is enough. I mean, yeah, I need money to live, but I need some respect and I need to be treated right. But I don't see many employers making any efforts to try to go out here to treat people right. I don't see anybody talking about doing things to change working conditions, to do things like giving people some stable hours, because one of the things that I believe would alleviate a lot of things is giving people some stable hours where they can work a consistent schedule, because people need routine in order to get stable, and people need stability in order for them to get that sense of mental and emotional security after going through so much chaos. But unfortunately, in many of these jobs out here, many of these employee bosses, they thrive on chaos. Like a lot of the female bosses, they thrive on chaos, they thrive on rumors, they thrive on drama. And yes, some of these beta male bosses and executives and some of these beta males, they thrive on chaos and drama as well. They like seeing people becoming destabilized where you're threatening their job every 8 seconds. But this is, again, a stick of dynamite that you're lighting. And the whole thing is, it's not a matter of if that dynamite explodes. It's a matter of when that dynamite explodes. And many of these employers, they don't understand that they're in a room filled with dynamite, and you're looking at a thermonuclear explosion. And if you don't diffuse that thermonuclear explosion, we may have a horror scene worse than George Floyd or January 6th. And that's how hot people are, because people have been dealing with all of this abuse for over a decade at these jobs because employers had the leverage. And now we were at a breaking point because, yeah, you had the leverage from 2008 to 2020, but in 2021, that board where you had the leverage started to crack in 2020, and that board started to not only crack, it just snapped in half. And you're sitting there thinking that the same board is the same, but it's not the same board, and you don't have the same leverage. And when I look at these employers, they're sitting there wondering, why are people quitting their jobs? I can tell you why they're quitting their jobs. They're quitting their jobs because they're frustrated. They're quitting their jobs because they're angry. They're quitting their jobs because they're not the same people. And they're quitting their jobs because even though they would lose everything from losing this job, they don't want to lose their minds, because that's the only thing that they've got is their sanity. And many of these people, they're on the brink as related to their sanity. And again, it's not a matter of if they crack. You better pray that they don't crack, because a lot of people out here, they're getting in their feelings. They're wanting to go out here and try to be these boss bullies, making these threats. Oh, I'm going to fire you. I'm going to write you up. And you don't know what you're dealing with, because this person, again, some of these people, they've been in a home where their wife or their husband has been just going in on them. And then they have to go to work and the train, like here in New York, you have to deal with the train where you're dealing with tension from, there's a guy on the train acting crazy. There's people out here dealing with stuff, but you're going to tell people, oh, just go back to work and go back to business as usual. It's like, what planet are you on? I mean, that's what I want to ask your president, your politicians, your executives. That's what I want to ask them. What planet are you on? You're sitting there thinking, oh, I can go back to the way it was. These people can go back to 9 to 5 like nothing. I'm sorry, but you can't put people through all sorts of hell and then expect them to just come back and go back to business as usual. I mean, a lot of these people, they have just been through the ringer for the last year. And many of these employers, what they want to do is just say, oh, just go back to work and just go back to the way things were. Go back to having to deal with lower wages. Go back to have to deal with these working conditions, with these bosses, with the unrealistic expectations. Go back to having somebody call you after 5 o'clock and ask you to do stuff, and go back to having people sending you text messages after 5 o'clock, not having your own time. I mean, this is a big problem a lot of people had to deal with. These companies, they want to just try to monopolize your time, and that monopolizing your time is a sign of codependency, because a codependent person is an extremely insecure individual, and they need to feel like they have the power over people in order to have a successful relationship. So you'll have many of these employers out here, they don't understand that their whole approach to business is, I need to have control over this person's time, over this person's life in order to get work done. And what they've been doing for the last decade is choking people out. And now people are just tired of getting choked out. They've gotten that moment to breathe. And because they've gotten that moment to breathe, that's why they're saying, I need to get away from this person. I need to get away from this abusive environment. I need to get away from this craziness. I mean, this doesn't have to be the way I need to work. And I know from experience, it's not the way you need to work, because as a guy who's been, again, forced to work on his own at home for over a decade, I can tell you that you don't really need to work like that. And you can still get the same work done in the workplace, and you can still make the same money. And that's one of the things employers really don't understand, is you can still get this work done by having people telecommute, and you can still get that work done in a productive fashion. But they don't really want to go out here and do that, because many of these baby boomers, they want to hold on to the office like a vice grip, because it's what they're used to. But as somebody who has worked at home on all of these books, I mean, let's look at this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books in 2 years. I can tell you that you can get that same work done at home, and that person can have a bit more of a balanced life and not have to deal with all of those stresses of a commute and not have to deal with all of those stresses of having some sociopath boss breathing down their neck, harassing them, nagging them, threatening them, bullying them. That's not what we need to do. I can tell you that I've worked with numerous artists and I've gotten my books out on schedule. I have, worked on different projects with different people and still gotten things done. And if I can go out here and again do live streams and set up a whole schedule for myself, then why don't you trust your workers? And that's the critical question that many people, thank you, Kendra, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. She's right. Boomers want to keep the status quo, but the status quo is over. And a lot of people don't want to go back to that modern day, that classic workplace where you're sitting in an office for 9 to 5, because people weren't sitting in the office from 9 to 5 from 2001 to 2020. No, people were sitting in an office for 12, 13, 14 hours. They missed their family. They missed their kids. Their kids were basically being raised by daycare. People were never allowed to even connect and bond with their children. And many of these employers, they don't understand that, look, your work schedule is absolutely certifiably insane. It is Arkham certified to work this many hours in a day. I mean, nobody should be sitting in an office from, I say, 6 a.m. all the way till 8, 9 p.m. Nobody should be sitting there that long. I mean, our parents, they came to work, they went to work from 9 to 5. Then from 5 on, they went home, rested, and relaxed. And then after they rested, over the course of a year, they had 2 vacations, and they managed to get more done than people are doing today, even with all of this technology and all of this automation. People got more work done in a day then than they are now, and people didn't feel as stressed as they did today. And again, we have all of these people out here. They want to get a break. They want to get a breather. I mean, they want some balance, as I see it. And that's why people are quitting, because they don't see any balance to today's workplace. And because you've got an entire group of clueless managers, they just sit there and go, well, I'm wondering why all these people are leaving. Well, they are leaving because the job is just too strenuous for their mental health. And some of these people think, oh, that's being selfish. But no, it's not being selfish. It's just people, they need some breathing room, and it's hard to breathe when somebody keeps putting a boot on your neck. And people reach that breaking point, and when they reach that breaking point, that's when they said, I want to walk away from this job because I can't get a break. I can't get a breather. I can't even get a minute to go to sleep. And you have these NPC bosses who they want to try to meet these ridiculous goals of these executives, not understanding that you're not going to be able to meet those goals or get back to that level of productivity until you understand the traumas that people have gone through. And until you understand the traumas that people have gone through, you're not going to get any employees. All you're going to do is go through a vicious cycle. Because I was reading about how many of those Houston employees at the hospital, how they threatened to fire them as related to them not taking this jab, and they sued and they couldn't get any sort of recourse. But I see how they're going to damage themselves, because it's hard to get productivity if you fire those workers. You have over 100 hospital workers, and how are you going to get back to your productivity if you fire those people as related to your mandate? How are you going to get back to productivity if you go out here and push those people away? And the sad part is, many of those people with their mandates don't see how they're working against themselves. And because they don't see how they're working against themselves, they don't see how you're practically going out here and are going to create an even worse problem for yourself. Because when your employees are gone, that 100 or so employees that if you fire them, who are you going to get to replace them? That's the critical question I would like to ask that Houston hospital administrator. Who are you going to get to replace those people? Because you already have a worker shortage in this country. And if you think you're going to import some people from overseas, that's not going to happen because there's a whole backlog as related to visas that Lisa Cabrera talked about in her video. And a lot of these other countries are still off limits. So you're working against yourself. And even if you were able to find someone, you are not going to be able to get them up to speed because, as from my personal experience, I can tell you that it takes 90 to 180 days for a new worker to get back into to productivity. And with a new worker, to get that worker up to speed, it takes 90 to 180 days. So you're sitting there thinking, oh, I'm going to get rid of those workers who don't follow my mandate. But then you're going to find yourself not finding anybody in a pool who wants to work for you. And that's something that a lot of these guys aren't really thinking about critically because they're so caught up in their feelings. They're not understanding that many workers, they may know that this job is available, but they're not interested in this job. And the reason why they're not interested in this job is because the work conditions are unbearable. The conditions are just untenable, and the management is just too hostile. And nobody wants to deal with this type of workplace where it's like a powder keg every day. You're going in and having to deal with this tension. You have to go in and deal with this stress, and then you have to come home to more stress. And people just they're tired of dealing with this kind of workplace. And that's the thing that many of these bosses don't get, many of these politicians don't get, many of these executives don't get. They don't seem to be listening to their employees. They're expecting people to just come in and just start all over. And this is another ridiculous expectation many employers have. They have this other expectation talking about hit the ground running, which I think is more BS, because how can somebody hit the ground running and come into a company that they know nothing about? I mean, how can somebody come into a company they know nothing about and then start all over, start their lives all over? I mean, that's an absurd notion. And many employers push this in the early 2000s. I remember a family member telling me in 2002, people expect this, but that's unrealistic because when you enter a company, again, you're starting over from zero, and you need to learn this company's culture. You need to learn their work rules. You need to learn their standards. But these people expect you to come in knowing what they know, and it's impossible for you to know what they know. And they're sitting there wondering, well, why can't we find anybody? Well, you can't find anybody because you have ridiculous expectations that don't match reality, and you have unrealistic ideas, like somebody coming into a job that they just got hired for and coming in and knowing what you know, expecting them to know your policies, your procedures, the way you do things. No, there's a transition period for that. And that's just it's just something that is all part of life. I mean, if I move from one neighborhood to the other, I don't know where everything is, and I have to figure out where everything is. So that's a transition that I have to encounter, and I've encountered that over this year. What's going on, Reginald? Glad to see you here. You go over from one neighborhood to the other. It takes you a while to figure out where things are. And the same thing on a job. When you come into a job, you come in, you have to figure out where everything is, and you have to figure out who the players are, and you have to figure out what is going on at this job. And many of your employers, they're sitting here like, oh, I expect him to come in knowing everything I know. I expect him to be able to know our procedures. This guy just got here. You got to let him figure out how things work from 90 to 180 days in order to understand what's going on at this job. So they don't really, they're wondering, like, why are these people quitting? Well, people quit because they they're just tired of all of these crazy people at these jobs, and these people just push people too far. Then you have a lot of these employers, they don't want to give you any training, they don't want to give you any support, and people are just, that frustrates them even more and has them left out in the lurch. And again, that's the thing that makes people really frustrated is you come into this job, you want to do a good job, but then you get no support. And even worse, you get these old coworkers, especially these boomers, these people, they sit there and they don't want to support you. Some of these people, because they're selfish, they want to hang you out to dry. They want to see you get fired. And they're thinking that, oh, this is a good thing. Oh, I got this person fired. But getting somebody fired, that's really cruel because this person, thank you, Tato the Elder, and he asked, is the black community the equivalent to a plantation with its politicians, corporations, and prison systems equivalent to slave masters? I'd have to say it is. I'd have to say it's a lot like the plantation, but I'd have to say America's corporate America is just like a plantation. And you have a lot of bosses here who just, they are like slave masters and they have no understanding of people. They have no understanding of how to treat people. They don't follow the Bible as related to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And they do people dirty. And then they're sitting here asking, oh, why can't we find somebody? That was my iPhone cracking. So, Sterling, that was the iPhone that I use for the videos. And I needed to charge the battery. But a lot of people, they don't understand that people, you can't treat people all kind of way and then wonder, oh, why can't we find anybody? Well, you can't find anybody because mainly you're just disrespectful to people and you do people dirty. Now, in addition to doing people dirty, many of these employers out here, they don't want to pay anybody. And as a guy out here who understands business and has worked with different artists, I understand you get what you pay for. And the whole thing is, you can't come to people talking about low wages and then expect to get quality workers. A lot of these people, again, they're still stuck in the 2001 economy. They're still stuck in a 2001 economy type mentality. And they're still stuck thinking it's just like 2001, 9/11. Let's get the likes up. I mean, it's over 120 in the chat. Let's get the likes up and get that up because that helps the algorithm. And again, you've got people thinking that they can go and get these wages back to the way they were. And they're sitting there thinking, oh, I can get somebody for $8 an hour, $10 an hour, $11 an hour. But our economy is different right now. Our economy is one where we're dealing with inflation, and you're expecting a person who was already struggling on a minimum wage job before this recession. Thank you for the Cash App. I really appreciate it. You're expecting people who were already struggling before to just come out here and go back to working for these wages. Well, those wages weren't paying people's bills even before your Donald Trump came into office. So you already have people already dealing with that whole issue as related to the economy. And they're sitting there wondering how they're going to be able to make ends meet as related to these jobs because they're sitting there wondering, hey, I've already dealt with this pandemic. I'm dealing with this inflation. Gas prices are up. Car prices are up. Food is up. And then you have an employer expecting you to go back to life as it was before at the same wage, where prices have gone up. And that's just, again, shows how out of touch many of these employers, executives, and politicians are. Many of these people expecting you to go back to these wages, and these wages weren't even covering your bills before this pandemic. So they're sitting there, oh, why doesn't he want to take this job? Well, this person did what I did and did the math and said to themselves, what is the purpose of me taking this job if this is not even going to cover my gas? I mean, I know that people who watch my streams all over the world, they know about these high gas prices, especially here in the South and the Midwest and the West Coast. I mean, those gas prices, they were $5 before the pandemic. And these gas prices, when you talk about a $12 an hour job, think about how many gallons of gas that's gonna cost to fill up things. I mean, and many of these jobs, what's even worse is these jobs are part-time. So you're asking somebody to go back to a part-time job that doesn't even pay for the gas to go to work. And again, it shows how out of touch many of your politicians and executives are, and how they're not thinking critical about this whole economy. They're sitting there wondering, oh, why doesn't he want to take that job that pays $12 an hour? Well, when your gas is $5 a gallon or $4 a gallon, and you have to fill up the tank of your car, then how are you going to be able to pay the rest of your bills? That's a critical question I'd like to ask many of these politicians, executives, and business owners. I mean, how do you expect somebody to go out here and fill up a tank of gas to drive to work if the gas is $4 a gallon and it takes maybe 3-4 gallons a day to get to work and back? I mean, nobody's really doing the math on this, but I had to do the math on that when I first started working at the supermarket Food Emporium back in 1996. I mean, they were only paying me, $109 a week, and I was working for 28 hours at one time, and it was $5 an hour, and the fare at the time was $1.50, and I needed 10 rides in order to get back and forth to work Monday through Friday. So that's $15 straight out of my paycheck every week. And as time went on, then I had the bus fare went up. And again, that's an inelastic budget item. So that takes money away from people. And again, when you're not paying people enough, that cost of gas, and then you have to come in with rent, and then you have to come in with electricity, and then in some cases you have to come in with water. This is what makes it where people look at this job, and you're talking about $15 an hour. They're looking at you and like, look, dude, I got this gas right here, which costs $84 to fill a tank, and that's like out of a whole paycheck, $84 to fill a tank, and that's barely about two weeks or weeks worth of gas, depending on the vehicle. And then I've got to go out here and have money for things like lunch. I've got to have money for things like other items and stuff like that. And a lot of these people, they're not doing the basic math. This is basic math, not understanding, oh, you can't find any employees. Well, when they do the math and they add the cost and they look at that $15, that $15 is not spending the way $15 did in 1996. That $15 is spending like $5 in 1996. And that's because we don't really, again, think critically about our economics. And that's why people don't want to bother with these jobs. I mean, if it's got to be something that pays off for the worker, and the worker has to be able to cover their basic costs. And people could not cover their basic costs even before the pandemic because, again, 50% of your workers, they were working for minimum wage. And a lot of those workers that we called essential workers, we have practically crapped on. And those essential workers, they're sitting there, they've gone through this pandemic, they've dealt with the trauma of having to deal with being verbally abused by managers, being verbally abused by customers. Because I understand the pain of a lot of customer service workers, because I worked in customer service at Food Emporium, and I worked at the City College Science Library at the front desk. So I know how some of these people can just be so abusive, and how some of these people can just be just hostile. I mean, I know how nasty they can be. And the whole thing is you got to go through that every day with these people. And that can really get to you. It can really frustrate you. And then instead of giving these so-called essential workers any sort of raise, all they got was one big finger. And as those people got a finger from these managers, that's when they started to walk away from these companies. So many of these companies, they're sitting there thinking, well, why can't we get back to business as usual? You're never going to get back to business as usual. They don't really, I mean, what's really troubling and disturbing to me is how these people don't really understand the concept of change. They don't understand the concept of people becoming different people. And they don't understand how a person can be transformed from a life experience. They don't really understand how a life experience can just turn somebody into a completely different person, because they don't really understand this, because they've never really been through any sort of anything hard. And that's what I see with a lot of these boomer managers, a lot of these politician boomers, and a lot of these executives. These people, they have never really been through something where they have had their entire life upheaved or had their entire life completely derailed. And I can tell you from experience, when you've had your entire life completely derailed, you're not the same person you were before. I mean, because I had my life derailed on multiple occasions when I was trying to get things started, like with my job at AmeriCorps and Strive, and with my job at City College, thinking that it was going to start things. So I know what it is to get your life completely derailed and have to try to start all over again. And this is something that many Americans are dealing with, and that's why they don't want to go back to work at these toxic jobs, because many Americans, they don't want to go back to having their life derailed by a toxic boss, a sociopath who will go out here and threaten them by saying, you have to take this jab, or you have to do this, or you have to do that. They just like, look, I just don't want to deal with you. I don't want to deal with your crazy. I don't want to deal with this insanity. And after you've been transformed, people just don't want to. They don't want to deal with the same thing, because you've been transformed through all of this pain and all of this suffering. I mean, you have just practically been torn to pieces. And that was one of the things that really a lot of these guys don't understand. And then Kendra makes a good point. Yeah, the CEO of JP Morgan was trying to threaten people, and he doesn't understand that people over the last year, they have learned a whole different process. I mean, they have learned how to hustle. And this is something that he doesn't understand, that a lot of those bankers, investment bankers he had working for him at home, a lot of those guys learned how to do side hustles. A lot of them learned how to do things with crypto. A lot of these people who had Series 7, they're out here, they were able to go out here and create their own portfolios, and they were able to start laying the foundations for their own business. So a lot of these executives, again, they're sitting there thinking, oh, I can threaten somebody into coming back to work for me, that boomer BS that they're trying to do. But all they're going to do is drive all of their talent out. And once they drive their talent out, all they're going to be left with is Bubba, Tiny, Pookie, and Ray Ray. And these people, they are just going to sit there and do nothing for you, because all those people, they've already been, all the people with talent and skill, they have been through enough. And again, they have been sitting at home developing skills and learning that as they work at home, they can go out here and hustle for themselves. And they're learning how to use tools like the internet towards creating revenue streams, and not go out here and depend on a salary. So threatening somebody, that's not going to work to get him back to the office or her back to the office. That's just going to wind up pushing your talent out of your business and push them into the direction of becoming either your competition or going to work for a smart competitor. Because a smart competitor, he's going to sit there and listen to you bully and threaten and harass the workers and say, hey, you can come over to my job and I'm not going to do you dirty like that, dude. And he's going to steal many of your workers. And this is something many of your employers really don't understand, like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. You go out here and threaten these people, and you're going to wind up, again, pushing out your talented workers, and those beta male ticking time bombs, they're going to wind up exploding on you. So you don't, again, understand the stick of dynamite you're dealing with. because these people are not the same people who left in March. These are completely different people than the ones you had in your office in March. You don't have the leverage over many of these people, and many of these people, they have been pushed to the edge to the point where they have nothing to lose. And as somebody who has walked that tightrope as related to that edge, I can tell you that when a person is hitting that stage of nothing to lose, you don't want to push them over the edge, because if that person, like a lot of these beta males that we're seeing are exploding out here, you push them too far, you're going to have to deal with something that may not be in your favor. Thank you, Seeker of Truth, for the super chat. And he says, I've been through what you're and experiencing what you are speaking on. Yeah, and it's a very painful thing to deal with. It is a very horrifying thing to deal with. And when that person is on that edge, you don't really want to just push too far. And a lot of employers, they're not understanding, again, the dynamite that they have lit. And they don't understand you're holding a lit stick of dynamite in your hand. And that lit stick of dynamite, there's a possibility. It's not going to possibility of it exploding. It is going to explode. And you go out here threatening people, bullying people, harassing people. Those days are over. You need to learn how to handle people with kid gloves, because, again, a man on the edge, a man with nothing to lose, is a dangerous thing, because a man with nothing to lose is capable of doing anything. And that's something many of these American business owners and these executives and politicians have not really figured out. No, all they're thinking about is numbers. All they're thinking about is statistics. And they're not thinking about we the people. And because they're not thinking about we the people, what's happening is that you're going to winding up having to deal with we the people. Now, a lot of these people, they're hot, they're angry, and that's why they don't want to bother with these jobs, because they look at these jobs, they look at the working conditions, they look at the wages, and they don't see anything that benefits them. All they see are disconnected managers, disconnected employers, disconnected politicians, disconnected bosses, sitting there thinking that you're going to get somebody to work all of these crazy hours, and you're going to have to reconfigure the way you work in this country, because the days of getting people to work 12 to 14 hours in an office, you're not going to get that. And if you do get it, you're going to get a very, very, very angry, explosive person. And that's not what you want at work these days, especially during this man crisis. And you really don't want to get people pushed any further. I mean, people are already on the edge, and if we get this eviction moratorium that ends, people are going to be more on edge. So I'm looking at this whole situation, and again, Americans, as I see it, as related to these jobs, they are walking away because they don't see anything to walk to. They don't see any sort of hope given to them. They don't see any way of building a future, because the job doesn't pay enough for you to build a future. It doesn't even pay enough to pay your bills. And it doesn't even pay enough to fill your tank with gas or cover your bus fare. So most people, they aren't interested, because you're not bringing anything to the table, and all you're doing is going out here and thinking that I have this leverage, I can do whatever I please. And people are saying, okay, you want to do whatever you please, then do it by yourself. And you want to go out here and do people dirty, well, then guess what? You go out here and stay by yourself, because I'm not dealing with you. It's the same thing that a lot of these black women were dealing with. They got out here and did a lot of the black men dirty, the decent guys, and then they wondered where the decent guys are, because they were out here with Pookie and Ray Ray. And now many of these employers are sitting there wondering, well, why can't I find anybody? Well, you can't find anybody because you treated people like trash. And now you expect people to just sit here and go back to being treated like trash, go back to a codependent work environment. And then people just, again, are at the breaking point. And that breaking point is already cracked, has already snapped the board. And that board is going to get worse with the eviction moratorium kicks in. And again, we have a powder keg, but your politicians don't see the loaded stick of dynamite in their hands, and many of the employers don't see the loaded sticks of dynamite in people's hands. And they also don't see how a lot of employees have adapted in this time, because you give people a year and they do adapt. And that's why we saw people doing Uber. That's why we saw people doing YouTube. That's why we saw people going out here and doing eBay. That's why we saw people going out here and doing things like crypto. We saw people finding new ways to make a living. So they're not really that excited to go back to these jobs. I mean, even some of these women who did the OnlyFans, and I'm not a fan of OnlyFans, people found other ways to make a living. And this is something that many of your employers who are these executives, they're living in a bubble. They don't understand. You cannot go out here and expect the world to go back to the way it was when you change it. But that's a beta male thing and a female thing. They expect things to go back to the way it was after they've gone out here and done something wrong. So they'll sit there and say, oh, well, what? I cheated on you, and they expect you to still be the same person. But your emotions have changed and you have changed. So you're not going to be the same person because you don't have the same feelings about that person after they have betrayed your trust. And that's what a lot of Americans feel like with these jobs. They feel these employers have betrayed their trust. They feel these politicians have betrayed their trust. They feel the news media has betrayed their trust. They feel everything has betrayed their trust. So you can't expect people to go back and trust you like they did before. You can't expect people to go back to the way they used to be. You can't expect people to go back and be what they were before. I mean, you can't take back the cruel things that you say to somebody. They've already heard them. They've already felt them. They've already had to process them. But you expect people to go back to what they were before. And that's something many of these employers don't really understand. You just can't do somebody dirty for over a year. You just can't go out here, destroy a person's livelihood, destroy a person's business, put their home and their livelihood at the brink, and then expect them to just get back up the next morning a year later, get back on a bus or get back in a car and go back to work. I mean, you can't expect that if you are a critical thinking, logical person, but a psychopath or a sociopath will sit there and say, oh, why isn't this person doing what they did before? I mean, we're opening back up. Well, yeah, you're opening back up, but this person's mind has changed. This person's world has changed. And this person is a completely different person than they were before. Again, I know from my own experience, again, I was a happy-go-lucky, bright, friendly person when I was, before I went to this junior high school, IS 148. And then after I went to this school and I went to Park West, I became a quiet, somber, stoic person after my experiences. And that stoicness became even more after I wound up losing several jobs, and I wound up becoming more and more distant as a result of having to try to process that trauma of losing those jobs. So I know how your life can completely change and how it can change you. And a lot of these, again, employers are sitting there, I can't find anybody. Well, you can't, that person isn't the same person. So they're not going to sit there and want to go out here and deal with the same stresses. A lot of these people have anxieties. A lot of these things can trigger anxiety. I know when I first started my job back in 2008, I was dealing with anxiety for a good 2-3 weeks because I was processing the trauma of losing that job in 2001 and 2002, and just scared to death I was going to wind up losing everything. And I know where that fear it can practically have it where you can't even talk, and it can have it where you can't even eat. I mean, that's how deep that anxiety goes. And you're asking somebody to come back to work and just go back to being what they were. But they can't go back to being what they were, because if they come into the workforce, they're just going to become really anxious because they don't know if their life is going to be upheaved again. And I feel for the people in the UK who had their, in Canada, like Computer Robots, who've had their lives upheaved 2 or 3 times with lockdowns. I mean, this does devastating damage to people's minds. This is like taking a wrecking ball to somebody's life, not, and especially people in the UK and Canada, 2, 3, 4 times. You're thinking you're coming out of it, then they come at you again and hit you again. And I know what that is, but they just don't really understand this. Again, these people who are at the top, they have had their money for so long, they don't understand where another person is coming from. They don't understand where another person has been, and they don't understand what people have to deal with. And they're sitting there, oh, we just wonder, why won't you come back for this job? And where are you going to find the people? Now, some people say, oh, automation will wake up people, but no, there's a critical question. Who's going to buy your stuff if you automate everything? So a lot of these companies, they don't know the slippery slope that they're on. And if you don't have workers, you have nobody to buy your stuff. So they're sitting there, again, detached from reality, detached from their people, and they're sitting there wondering, oh, why don't you just go back to work? Why would I want to go back to an environment like that after being in an environment where I have been locked up for half a year and then trying to wonder how I'm going to make a living for the next half of the year? So I look at your American workplace, and it's in a really dire place. Unfortunately, we have a president who's disconnected, governors who are disconnected, mayors who are disconnected, and bosses and executives who are disconnected, and they don't have a understanding of their workers. They don't have an understanding of what their workers are going through. They don't have an understanding of what many is going on in people's minds, and they don't understand the many people, their mental health is not in the same place as it was a year ago. So you may try to bring this person back, but they may not be the same person. And in some cases, you may be bringing a ticking time bomb into your workplace. And then if you go out here and push this person too hard, they may wind up becoming that landmine that explodes on you, like I talk about in many of my videos about these beta males. And that's something many American managers aren't really thinking about. They're thinking that they can go out here and threaten people, intimidate people. And again, you're dealing with a person who is not the same person. And when a person's livelihood has been threatened, they become a completely different person. They go on edge. They go into survival mode. They go into a day-to-day situation where their mind is just, it's a completely different mindset. I can tell you from personal experience, it's a completely different mindset when you lose a job. It's a completely different mindset when you're worrying about your money. It's a completely different mindset when you are counting up how many cents you're going to have in order to get through a month. It's a completely different mindset when you're trying to budget to try to keep $4 or $5 at the end of a month. It's a completely different mindset. But your executives and your politicians, they don't understand the mindset that your American people have right now. And they don't understand that place where, again, you're going from day to day. You're at the edge and you're this close to the nothing to lose stage. They're sitting there thinking, oh, he'll just go back to work and everything will just go back. It's like, no, it's not going to happen like that. And this is not going to be something that you can go out here and ready fix with a program like your Joe Biden's jobs program, because you have to deal with those psychological issues and you have to deal with getting this worker back to a place of mental stability. You have to make their lives more stable, and that stability has to be done in a way that makes people feel safe about things. So you have people who half the country has lost their jobs, and the other half has been on a job and practically been tormented on those so-called essential jobs. So that's why people are quitting, and that's why some have adapted and gone out here and found alternative sources of income, and that's why others have practically gone out here and they're looking for other jobs because they don't want to deal with the toxic work environment. They don't want to deal with the crazy bosses. They don't want to deal with the crazy policies, and they don't want to deal with the stress. And they would just like to be able to just work for 8 hours, go back home and rest. And a lot of these companies, they want to make the big profits, but they don't want to invest in the people. And this is one of the other big problems many employers have, is they want to go out here and profit off the people, but they don't want to go out here and invest in them and help by giving them the tangibles that they need in order to get themselves to a point of mental stability so that they don't have to worry about taking care of their everyday essentials. Now, what I see most Americans are going to need over the next decade, and I don't mean, because this is not going to get fixed in a year or 2 years. It's going to take at least a decade or a decade and a half to undo a lot of this damage. Is people need those stable 8 hours. They need to be able to go out here and rest. They need to be able to get their sleep. So a lot of these managers, I believe we're going to need a complete management overhaul, because a lot of these managers, they're just insane. A lot of these people, they don't understand what boundaries are, because they'll call you after you leave work at 5 o'clock. They'll call you in the morning at 7 a.m. And again, those are boundaries you're breaking, and you have to draw a line and give that worker that ability to breathe, because if you give that worker the ability to breathe, then they can perform at a peak level. And when you have a worker who's been given space, given the ability to breathe, be given the ability to just rest for a minute, they can go out here and perform. And that's why a lot of people like working at home, because there's nobody calling them, there's nobody texting them. They can just sit here, get this work done that they're assigned, and be able to do what they need to do. Because I know for a fact from working with comic artists out here, I don't really push too hard. I don't prod too hard. I'll just say, here is the storyboard, here is the concept, and I just leave the artist alone, and then they come back to me when they come back to me. I mean, I may have a deadline, but they'll come back to me when they come back to me, and that's how I work. And it hasn't been a problem with some of the comic artists I've worked on for covers. And the whole thing is, you have to give people space. And many of these employers, they don't want to give people space. They just want to crowd up on people. And I know from hearing about a lot of the dating and relationships, a person who's just crowded up on you, they make you uncomfortable. A person who is just micromanaging you, that's like the beta male who's always in your face. I mean, you don't feel like you can connect with this person because this person is just pushing too hard up on you, and they're not allowing you to breathe. And a lot of managers out here, they like to go themselves crowding people, and like Trex is saying, they like to impose overtime. And I find overtime to be a waste of time, because you're not really going to get anything done in that time. And a lot of other managers, they like to go out here and they like to play the cheap route by saying, oh, I'm not going to hire enough workers. And then when somebody calls out sick, you wind up with somebody short. But that's you trying to save 2 cents, but wind up costing yourself $20,000, because if that person quits, you're the one out of the money you paid for his salary or her salary, and you're the one out as related to productivity, because you wanted to be cheap on the short term and not go out here and schedule extra workers. And then in the long term, you wind up losing talent because you burn out your workers. And that's what we did during this pandemic, especially in the medical field. We practically burnt out so many doctors and so many nurses. I mean, a lot of our doctors and nurses, they went through a war, and many of these employers, they were sitting there trying to bully them as related to the jab. And that made a lot of people they hit their boiling point, because these people saw people dying in front of them. They saw people at the edge, and they themselves were put on the edge because they were working 70, 80-hour weeks. Some of these people were working 100-hour weeks. I mean, people pushed to the edge, and when you push people to the edge, they just say that there's, again, that breaking point, that boiling point, and they just decide to just walk away. I mean, there's a reason why people are walking away, and they're walking away because they are not getting anything out of the deal. And when I look at a lot of these job listings, and I've tried to get some of these jobs, I can see why people just don't want to be bothered with them. For example, I got a job offer from the post office last year, and they wanted people to work 6 days a week for 12 hours. I mean, that's just inhumane as I see it. But the whole thing is, people will take it because they think that they might possibly get job security. But what's even worse about the post office is they want you to work those 12-hour days at $16 an hour. And then what they want you to do is they don't even want to try to give you any sort of job security as related to that job. No, they make it a temporary job. And that's a middle finger thrown up at all of those people who go out here and apply for government jobs. I mean, a lot of people, they would go to the post office thinking, oh, I'll just go and work in this facility and maybe I'll be able to get some job security. But you can't get any job security because they make it where you are either a casual or a temporary. And the same thing happens with other jobs like the city. They make it where the job here in New York, where, oh, the job, it doesn't lead to any sort of permanency. It doesn't lead to any sort of job security. They make it where, oh, you're just going to work temp and you're going to sit there and work for $15, $16 an hour at a government job, but you don't get any sort of government benefits. I mean, you don't get health care. You don't get any sort of retirement benefits. So they're sitting there and saying, oh, you need to take this job at the government. And they sit there and go out here and talk about working for $15, $16 an hour, and then don't want to give you any government benefits. And then on top of it, the job isn't even permanent. The whole thing is you get a contract for maybe 6 months or a year. And then after the 6 months or a year is up, what happens is you're just out of a job. And the whole thing is you're stuck. And that's why we had the backlog with many of these post offices all across the country, because your politicians mismanaged the post office. And instead of going out here and giving these workers 3 shifts, they wanted people to work 12 to 16-hour shifts. And then they don't want people to work an entire permanent schedule. They want to just go out here and get people for 6 months to a year. So you're wondering why you can't find employees. Many of your business approaches are the reason why you can't find employees. Many of your policies are the reason why you can't find employees. Many of your management approaches are the reason why you wound up can't find employees. And this is not only the government with the post office, it is also has to do with many of these retailers, because I've applied at jobs at places like Target and places like Amazon and many other retailers. And these people, they have you, 1, apply online, and then 2, then after you apply online, you have to take some sort of computerized assessment. And I just did that this afternoon before I even came on the air. And these assessments, they're just these idiotic questions, these personality tests. They're not really good for finding good employees, because all of these personality tests, all they do is lead to you winding up finding people who wind up turning over. But many of these boomer employers, they don't really see what they're doing to their own companies, because they're sitting here with these personality tests and the people keep turning over. And what's even more troubling is companies like Amazon, they say that they want to turn over people every 3 years. And that was another thing that leads to people not wanting to go out here and apply for jobs is when you have an employer who doesn't, again, support your job security. So they're sitting there talking about, oh, we want to turn over employees every 3 years. But if you turn over employees every 3 years, then how does that person go out here and build? That's a critical question I'd like to ask those Amazon executives. How is a person supposed to build over once they wind up losing their job after 3 years? I mean, people, when they go to work, they're looking to go out here and start their lives. And if you go out here and derail their life, then how are they supposed to continue building momentum and be able to pay their bills? That's something many of these employers at the top really don't think about. They sit there and go, oh, I gave you a signing bonus, but I have rent, I have bills, I have food that I have to pay for, and I have gas that I have to put in the car. I mean, you're not really understanding where the person is. You're not understanding where the worker is. And that's one of the reasons why people are just quitting, because they don't see where the management is seeing them as a person. They're not seeing how they're looking to meet their needs, and they're seeing how the managers and employers are not allowing them to be able to start building that momentum to start moving their lives forward. Because that's what I ran into over 20 years ago when I went to work at Strive. I thought that was going to be the point where I'd be able to start my life. I thought this was the job I would be able to start my career. And then that got derailed. Then I got the job at the law firm that got derailed. And then I lost the city college job. And again, this frustrates people because they're going out here working their butt off, but they can't get any sort of momentum to move themselves forward. So many of these employers, they're sitting there wondering, well, why can't I find anybody? But they don't understand what's in it for the employee, what is in it for the worker, what are you giving to the worker, what are you bringing to the table, and what you're bringing to the table is absolutely nothing, because you're just, again, so cold and detached that you cannot see the people in front of you. And Mumia makes a good point. Yeah, these corporations are nothing more than fiefdoms. Nobody wants to be responsible for anyone, and nobody wants to give the worker what they need in order to make a good living. Nobody wants to go out here and help the worker move themselves forward. And they don't understand, if you don't invest in your people can't invest in you. Some of these employers, they're thinking, oh, I'm going to invest in these imported workers with the H-1B visa. But what they do is wind up investing in other countries, and those people take their wages that are already cut, and what they do is take their wages and send them back overseas. And that hurts the America's economy when you do this, because when you go out here and hire out foreign workers, the foreign workers have no investment in this country, and they could care less about this country. And all they're thinking about is building wealth to take overseas. Meanwhile, you're starving your own American economy by taking dollars out of your economy. And that makes no logical sense to me as related to this country. Bosses and corporate bosses, you're taking money out of your own country, and you're sitting there wondering, oh, why can't I find anybody? Well, if you don't invest in your people, they can't invest in you. And if you don't invest in your people, they can't go out here and innovate and create new things, because they have no real incentive to do so, because they can't get any sort of tangible wealth or any sort of payoff for investing their time in your job. And this is the intangible many employers aren't really understanding that people had, the ultimate variable time, because people have had time to think about their lives, they've had times to think about their futures, and they've had to think about the time that they would waste at these companies, and they've had time to think about how this company has not really benefited them over the last decade. So a lot of people are thinking about that important intangible of time, because time is something that once you lose it, you can't get it back. And a lot of people are looking at themselves, and they're looking at these lockdowns over the last year and saying to themselves, why would I want to invest time in an employer who does not respect me, does not regard me, does not value me, and has practically crapped on me and has crapped on the American worker ever since the 1991 recession. And this is something that most American, I'm sorry to hear that happened to you, Cuba. I mean, Psycho Candy, I'm sorry to hear that you lost so much money. But people don't want to waste time. I mean, people, they look at these jobs and they're saying to themselves, why would I want to invest years of my life at this company where this employer will just yank the rug out from under me? That's the question people ask themselves during this pandemic. They ask themselves, why would I want to go out here and invest my time into someone who just is so callous that they will just go out here and terminate me, and then after a period of time, then tell me, oh, go back to work after I've been through all of this pain and trauma, just yank that rug out from under me, and then go back and then say, if I don't take this jab, I will be fired. This is, they don't understand. It's really cruel to do this to someone. And again, they yank the rug out from under people. And that's why people are saying, why would I want to invest my time with a toxic person like this? Why would I want to invest my time in a place where I'm not valued? Why would I want to invest my time in a work environment where people are mistreating me? Why would I want to invest my time with a codependent person who just wants to go out here and just has no regard for anyone? And why would I want to invest my time in somebody this sick and this depraved? I mean, I look at those states that where they cut the unemployment benefits. They really didn't understand that people they didn't just want to go back to this work environment, because this work environment in America, that it needs to change. It's a sick place that produces sick and toxic people, and it breaks people down. And then you want to wonder why nobody wants to build anything up, because you tore them to pieces and you didn't invest anything in those people. You didn't invest in these people's health. And you see these people going through all of this great pain, and instead of you trying to help alleviate their pain, you go out here and add more pain onto them. After the year of hell they went through, you sit there and go after them even further. And that to me is just shows how depraved many of these executives are. I mean, you're attacking these people that you destroyed their lives, and now you want to take another wrecking ball to it. And then you wonder, why doesn't he want my job? Well, you destroyed this person's life. You destroyed this person's livelihood. You destroyed this person's ability to make a living over the course of a year. And then you're just expecting to just go back and be business as usual. That I don't know where these people are. I mean, this is just, again, it just shows complete detachment from reality, and it just shows just depraved indifference. I mean, I wonder where these people are. I mean, again, I said myself, when I was watching this whole pandemic go on, people have been transformed, and a lot of people, when I look at our politicians, they were transformed for the worse, because their obsession with Donald Trump turned many into monsters. And instead of them looking to serve the people, they got obsessed with him. And that obsession is still clouding their judgment and clouding their ability to be able to effectively serve we the people. And they're so caught up in their feelings about this, man, that it's practically not making them see the people that they serve and seeing what they need to do for these people who are, again, already been pushed to the edge and pushed to the point where people are cracking. And again, I look at this whole, again, Trump derangement syndrome. It had a major impact on people, because I believe that transformed people as well as the virus. And a lot of people, they don't really see how they have changed. But when I look at things, it's like people, they to expect to go back to the so-called normal after you've gone through destroying people's lives, destroying people's businesses, destroying people's homes, destroying their even their ability to even make a living. I mean, you can't expect people to just, oh, I'm just going to pick up, go back to the office after destroying somebody's life for a year. They've adjusted, they've changed. That's a completely insane notion, and only an Arkham certified individual would believe that they can go back to what something was after changing something. I mean, only an Arkham certified person would believe that's possible, but that's where we are with our wealthy. That's the way we are with our billionaires. That's the way we are with our politicians. That's the way with some of our bosses. I mean, they really don't understand reality, and we really need people to pull people back to reality, because when you look at reality and you see people, on this edge, it really makes you think about how things have changed so much here in this country. And I really think about that a lot. I think about how some people, they don't understand things,
if you want to start losing pounds fast,
these are supposed to be the educated people, but they're showing us how not smart they are. And they're just showing us, how messed up a lot of them are, because they're wondering, oh, why can't I find employees? Why can't I find? It's like, it's not. This goes beyond childcare. This goes beyond any sort of minor issue. They're trying to bring it in and talk about, oh, we can't find any workers because women can't find childcare. Well, you can't put a woman inside of a home and have her nest for a year and then expect her to want to just come back to the office. Again, only a clinically insane person would believe that's possible. They're sitting there thinking, oh, I'll just want this person to come back to work. I mean, they've bonded with their children. They've learned a whole different way to live, but you expect them to come back. I mean, that's, again, Arkham certified behavior, but this is what we have many employers sitting there. And then on top of it, thinking, I'm going to threaten people. I'm going to bully people. I'm going to harass people. But I don't really want to think about their needs. It's all about me. It's all about what I want. And that's not how you run a business. A business is supposed to serve the people. A business is supposed to give the people what they need. A business is supposed to support your people. I mean, when I go out here with the SJS Direct Imprint, my mission was to create positive Black stories about the African American experience. Moshe, salute to you. I wanted to go out here and serve the customer by giving them positive products and give Men's Issues products. I look to serve the customer, and the whole thing is, we have a lot of companies that look to serve themselves, and a lot of politicians looking to serve themselves, but not looking to serve its employees. But the employees see nothing in it for them, and that's why they are just walking away. And that's the type of passive resistance we have, because they're saying if the best way to resist is to just walk away. If something isn't serving you, you just stop supporting it. And if you stop supporting it, what will happen is that institution will die. And that's what's the problem with many of these companies is many of these companies, they don't really understand how they are just turning their customers away. They're turning their employees away, and they're turning people. I'm glad you enjoy it, Gia. I really wanted to do this one because one of my viewers suggested it. She wanted me to talk about the job market and things that's related to the job market. And as somebody who has been through this for the last 20 years, I felt like I could add something to the subject of why all these people are quitting and why all these people are walking away, because I have lived through this. I have dealt with this. I mean, I wanted to go to work ever since 2001, and I have run into wall after wall after wall, and I know the kind of frustration people are dealing with today. I know about all of the pain so many people are dealing with because I've dealt with that pain myself. I know about how people are on edge because you're worried about your money, you're worried about whether you're going to have a place to stay, you're filled with tension, anxiety, and you basically are at a point where you're basically on pins and needles every day, walking on eggshells, having to deal with people wanting to push your buttons. I mean, sometimes your family will push your buttons because they don't know where you're at and they want you to go and do something, but there's nothing you can do. I mean, I've been where that is, where you want to go out here and get this job and get things going, and you want to make other people happy, but you can't make them happy because you put in the applications, but then nobody calls, or you go to the interview, you bring your best to the interview, and then the person still blows you off, and they're thinking that it's something you're doing, but a lot of times it's nothing you're doing. Sometimes these people have already hired their friend or hired their cousin, but they're thinking, oh, it's something about you, and it's not something about you. It's like that's one of the things people really don't get about being out here and being out of work. They don't know how it is when you're counting every penny and you're doing things like selling things that mean a lot to you, like collectibles. They don't know where you're at, when you've been out of work. But I have been at those points. So when I listen to the average American worker and I feel their pain, because I've been through that pain for the last 20 years, because I wanted to go out here and get that full-time job. I wanted to work that 9 to 5. I wanted to go out here and get my life started and go out here and get my own place. I wanted to go out here and try to go out here and build the traditional way, but I had to go a different way because the way this job market is and how many of these employers, they just don't want to give anybody a shot, and then they don't want to go out here and help anybody. It's all about them, and a lot of these employers, they really want to bring this woman back to the workplace, and that's one of the things they're upset about, because they want to bring this woman back to the workplace so they can have cheap labor, and they can have labor that will be submissive to them, docile, and just go along to get along with crazy, because a man is going to push back, and they don't like the idea of having men in the workplace. And over the last decade, men left the workplace. Over 8 million men left, and now 3 million women have left the workplace, but they want those women back because they want that cheap, submissive labor to come back. Because every report I watch on ABC News, they're always talking about the women leaving the workforce, but they never talk about the 8 million men who left back in 2008 to 2012. They don't talk about those 8 million men who left, and they don't really want to talk about them, but the whole thing is they want people to come back, and they want people to come back to something and make it like it was before. And again, that's the type of thinking only a simp has. A simp will sit there and he'll cheat on a girl and then say, oh, why won't you make things like it was? Well, she can't see you being like it was because you've changed her emotions and changed the way she saw you by going out here and doing something ratchet, but you want it to go back to the way it was. And what we did here with the flatten the curve was you change the way people were, but then you want them to go back. And again, only a simp thinks that way. Only a beta male or a female thinks that way. And you're not going to get that to happen, because once people transform, they will never be what they were. So that's something many of these guys don't really get. That's something they really don't understand. And it's something that I was hoping to explain to the viewers out here. And I wanted to explain it because, people wonder why these people are quitting. Why are these people walking away? Yeah, Dylan, that happens. People break out in shingles due to anxiety. I mean, that happens. And I've had coughing fits, and I know what people go through with this anxiety. It can practically tear your body apart because the stress is just overwhelming. And this is something people aren't really understanding, and they're not understanding. You're going to have to really fundamentally change the way we work in this society. We're going to have to change the way we approach business in this society. And that's something we're going to have to do, because as I see it, we have to go out here. We're going to have to change to 2 to 3 shifts to give people that breathing room, give people that breathing space. And you're going to have to go out here and get these wages in line so that people can go out here and be able to take care of themselves, because we're not investing in people. And if you don't invest in people, they can't take care of themselves. This is something many of your managers and your bosses can't understand, because many of them don't do the math. Many of them, they go out here and talk about science, but they don't understand how when you mess with people's money, you mess with people's minds. And when you mess with people's minds, then you're going to wind up with a problem. So I look at the big picture as related to this whole situation, and I just look at it and say to myself, people want to be able to make their living. They want to go out here and be able to pay their bills, and they want to be able to go out here and leave something lasting. And America isn't giving people the hope that they wanted. They're not giving them their American dream, and they're not giving them anything to aspire to. I mean, a lot of people out here who do aspire to things like myself, we try to do things like, I'm up now working on this John Haynes comic book. I do that again as I'm looking for work, but I go out here and people have things they want to aspire to and achieve and accomplish, and people just don't want to just go to work and come back from work and then go back to just pay bills and exist. People want life, and the thing is that America is not giving Americans anything to live for, and that's why we have a man crisis. That's why we have a woman crisis, and that's why we have a complete, real dire situation as related to the job market, because many people at the top don't understand how your average worker is doing at the bottom, and they don't respect the worker, they don't appreciate the worker, and they don't want to give the workers what they need to be able to take care of themselves. And because they don't want to go out here and invest in their people, that's why people are looking to find other ways to work, and those other ways are what they're looking to do. And others are thinking about other alternatives. It's just like 9/11. After the towers collapsed, many Americans started going back to school because they were tired of winding up going to one of these jobs one day and wind up losing their lives. They wound up looking to try to get a career going so they could have a lasting legacy, because people felt their mortality that time. And that's the type of shift we see with this pandemic. We're seeing a lot of people really thinking about how they want to work and how they want to live, and thinking about their futures. And a lot of people don't really see much of a future at these jobs, because many of these employers have made the workplace into a hellhole, and nobody wants to just go out here and deal with misery every day from these micromanagers, these insecure beta males, and these insecure females who breathe down people's necks, or have to deal with the stresses of dealing with a work environment where you can't really just breathe and just be able to get work done. And if there's a mistake made, we work through it and we get it done. That's what people want to be able to just deal with. They don't want to be just practically destroyed emotionally, psychologically, and mentally by a crazy boss. They want someplace where they can work through stuff and work through things. That's what people want, but nobody wants to give them that. But all they want to do is think it's just about them just being lazy. No, people are not lazy. People have been through great trauma. People have been through great stress. And when you've been through a great trauma or great stress, like losing a job, you're just not going to want to rush into a job and go back to it. Because when you go to that next job, I can tell you from experience, you're going to be anxious, you're going to be tense, because you're afraid that if you make one mistake, and a lot of these jobs, you have crazy people who sit there, and if you make one minor mistake that disrupts their smooth world, they want to fire you. And that's the type of thing that destabilizes people. And again, this is what leads to people looking to participate in things like workplace violence, because you have people who go out here and are dealing already on edge because they are not getting, they're feeling like everything is unstable. And the person is already trying to get stuff together, and then you tear them apart once more. So they don't understand where they're at. And again, I look at this whole situation. People are wondering, well, why are people quitting? Well, people are quitting because they feel like these companies have given up on them. they feel like the government has given up on them. So they've just decided to give up even more. So they're sitting there saying, oh, the worker is lazy. No, the worker isn't lazy. The worker is just at their breaking point. And there's a point where somebody just says, what's the use? And they just give up altogether. And that's why you're having people quit and looking for other jobs, other places. But the whole thing is the way we work in America just isn't working. So I'm going to wrap up tonight's stream. I know tonight was a long one, but I had a lot I wanted to talk about in tonight's stream. So we have 122 in the room. So I'm asking everybody to head out and pick up some of my books like Eternal Night on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format, or to pick up books like Beastie Blast from the Past, ISIS the Main Event, and John Haynes, The Man with Nothing to Lose, and ISIS Revenge of the Cyber Goddess, and John Haynes Taking Care of Business. You can find all of those books on Amazon.com right now by clicking the link in the chat, and you can find all those books and pick them up on Amazon.com. And I'm trying to get the sales up on all of these SJS Direct books. And I have a lot of great positive Black titles on there. So I'm trying to meet the record that I met last month. So I can only do that with your support. And again, with 116 in the room, we can practically meet that number if everybody bought one book. So if everybody bought one book, we could meet that number and from last month and then move on to next month. So without your support, I can't continue to make streams like this and make videos like this. And one of the ways you can support me is by picking up books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. There's a lot of great books there, books that are YA, books that are fantasy, and there's a great nonfiction book I do called Stop Simping in the Workplace. So I have a lot of great titles on Amazon, and I would really appreciate your support. So I'm hoping you guys head over and pick up some of those books. I'm hoping that you guys also donate to the Cash App, because that also helps me stay on the air doing more streams. So I want to thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream, which was a record. We had over 150 people in the room, which was a major record for this channel. And I want to thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream. And I hope you will be there for next week's stream. I hope you find something you like. Ava, thank you very much in advance for your support. I really appreciate it. And I'm hoping you guys go ahead out and pick up some of the books on Amazon in paperback and Kindle format. So I want to thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream, and I hope you'll be there for next week's stream.